Hello everyone, Riolo Photography back. Now we are going to start with our blending for the high dynamic range photography, guys. We finally made it to the last tutorial of this photo itself. After I went through Lightroom, we've already gone through Lightroom and processed all of our 4 exposures. Like I said, somewhere down the line, maybe I'll release that information, but right now, not at this moment. I'm not comfortable releasing my processing. But I have finished all the processes. Once we are finished processing all the images, now you want to make sure that you have Photoshop opened up already in the background, because when you try to open up these photos in Photoshop as layers, it will not open up in Photoshop. So you got to make sure you have both programs opened. Now, I have my 4 exposures highlighted down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and hold down Control and then left-click on the 4 exposures that I want to open up in layers. Then we have to right-click, go up to Edit In, over to Open as Layers in Photoshop. So once we do that, it's going to open up all your layers here on the right hand side in Photoshop, guys. I hope you guys can see this. Now, the way I like to do this is I like to start off with my base photo right here. Then I like to move on and blend in our sky next, because the sky is a lot easier to do first. After that, we're going to go ahead and blend in a little bit of the white water I got right here, because on the base photo, it's still smooth, but it's not enough smoothness for me. So I'm going to go ahead and blend a little more white in for that and make it look a little more foggier around the rocks here, guys. After that, we're going to blend in a little bit of the trees. See how all that you can justify all the little details in the leaves and the trees itself, because we had to take our ND filter off and do a better exposure for that. Plus, we have a lot more color in this exposure for the trees. That's going to go ahead and bring out the rest of the colors in our image. So we definitely want to go ahead and make sure we have clear trees in the background, because it was a very windy day and we don't want blurry trees in our photo. You just don't want that. It's going to look terrible. Okay guys, let's go ahead and start. Now first, you want to make sure you're clicked on your base photo. We're going to create a mask. Go down to the bottom. Open up a mask. See how it opens up a white mask right here? Now, before you start blending, you want to make sure that you are on the mask itself, because if you start blending with a black brush, it's going to give you a black brush across your pictures instead of actually blending in on the mask itself. So if you're over here, it's going to paint your photo, and you don't want that. So you want to make sure you're clicked on the mask that we just opened. Now when we go over to the left over here, right now we have a white brush. White on white, it's not going to show anything, it's not going to blend anything, so we need to go and switch to black. Now I'm on my brush. Right now I have a 93 opacity, which is going to be very harsh. Now watch this if I go across the screen. We don't want that. Look how terrible that is. Look at that. That's just terrible. It's just going to really show up on your photo, and you really don't want that. It's going to look terrible, guys. So you got to make sure your opacity is lowered. When I do the sky, you really have to stay away from the water so you don't see that, because I'm going to use almost 100% on the sky. So we got to be very careful how we blend that in right across the horizon there. So let's go ahead and back out of that. We'll just go ahead and get rid of those brush strokes. Okay guys, let's go ahead and start. So I'm going to start off with 75%. We're going to go across the screen here. It's okay if you get a little silhouette on the trees, because you see how you can see the sky behind the leaves. We'll take care of that later when we blend in the trees, guys. Now you want to be very careful how you do this. Once again, you don't want it dragging on your water. You got to be very careful and make sure you have the faded out brush. You don't want a very hard, harsh brush. See how much color that's given us already? It's just going to really make the photo pop. It really is. And somewhere down the line, if you have any type of problems, as far as, oh, I'm sorry guys, before we get started, see how you have a double layer right here on the horizon itself. It looks like it's blurred out. That's because our images are not aligned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back out of this and delete our mask. And now we're going to hold Control and click left on all of our images. After we're done with that, we're going to go up to the top. We're going to click Edit and go down to Auto Align Layers and click OK. That will help us align all of our layers as best and perfect as possible. So this way, when you're blending these photos in together, it's over. All the photos are overlapping perfectly, because you don't want to have like a it's almost like a shadow effect. If you lower the opacity on the photo, you can see how it's all aligned perfectly. So we're going to go ahead and bring that back up. Now, sorry guys for backtracking there for a little bit. So now we're going to create the mask again. Make sure we're on black. We got our brush. Now let's go ahead and fade in. I'm going to try and fade in at 100. Like I said, we can always fix this at the bottom. If we do touch the water, we can just switch back to white and just erase that. So right now, I'm going to go across the screen in 100 opacity. This is just for the sky itself. Like I said, we can go back with the white brush and it will take out the brush strokes that we did, just in case if we went over it and we don't want to make it look like we brushed that in, so it doesn't look too bad on our photos. See, look at that. Look at the detail that we're getting right there. Isn't that just gorgeous? You want to make sure it's filled in properly. Be very careful. You don't want to see the halo effect on the bottom, so we have to really get close. I mean, if we have issues, we can always lower our size on the brush up here in the upper left hand corner and go it over again right down here with a smaller brush. So this way you have more control of where the brush is going and you don't mess up, and you have that little faded out effect on the water. Even though it's a little bit darker on the water like that, see that right there? How we're getting this dark effect on the water. It could be a shadow, you know, guys. I mean, it's really going to bring out a lot of color in this photo, and it's going to look just it's going to look fantastic, guys, once we get all of our images together. So now what I'm going to do is hit Control and the plus sign, and we're going to blow this up. Now let's see that streak right here. We don't want that. So we're going to go ahead and switch back to white. And let's try to keep it as close as possible. It really does take a steady hand doing this with a mouse. It doesn't have to be perfect, because later when you're messing around, you can always adjust your curves, and you won't even recognize those faded, the darker lines on the water, guys. So you really have to get perfect, but you got to do it as much as possible, so this way it doesn't look like you have a brush stroke across the screen. So it's not really that bad right there. Let's take a little more off. All right, let's zoom out. Now look at that. Now the water looks a little too bright up here at the top. So what we'll do right now, I'm going to blend in a little more, switch to the black. Like I said, sometimes I like to leave a little silhouette here on the edge. Apologize for my phone, guys. Okay. Now let's try lowering the opacity here. And we might be able to get a little bit of darker color on the water itself, so this way it looks and feels real, because that white, I think that water is just way too bright. And you want it to look realistic, guys. You really do. You don't want this to look fake. So let's go ahead and brush a little in there. You really have to have control over your opacity. You gotta pay attention, guys. You really gotta have a good eye to how you fade this in. See how much real that looks? It looks more realistic. We can lower the brush again. Get a bigger brush size. Like I said, you want to make sure you have this faded out brush. The Sound Roft pressure size brush. That's the best brush to use, not the hard round. It won't look like it's faded in. So let's try and fade in a little more with a lower opacity. Make it look real. It's basically